Hi, Dan Tokar here at the Willow Forge in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And today on a Blacksmith's Dictionary, we're going to have something a little different. We're going to have some history. My friend Mike Pratt is here, and he's going to tell us stories about when he worked in the steel mills around Pittsburgh.
Good morning. My name's Mike Pratt, and I'm here at Dan the Blacksmith's blacksmith shop, the Willow Forge. And Dan asked me to come over. I've known Dan for 30 years. We're both from Western Pennsylvania. And oftentimes we've talked about the steel mills in Western Pennsylvania. Steel mills that are no longer there. They've actually been torn down. So I want to tell a story of my time in the steel mills. And the time frame here is between 1967 and 1973, when I graduated from high school and when I graduated from college. And it took me like 6.5 years to get through a 4-year program because I had to stop and work my way through. And so Vietnam was hot and heavy at that time. And you might be wondering, why wasn't I in Vietnam? Well, in my senior year of high school, all these recruiters came to our school in like the end of September, beginning of October, and they told us about all the careers we could have in the military. And one guy was there from the Army, and he talked about the Warrant Officer Training Program, where they would teach us to fly helicopters. Well, that just hit home to me, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fly helicopters. So I signed a pre-enlistment document in order to get that school. And I did that in early October or the end of September. And then later on in the football season, mid-October, I cracked my shoulder up, dislocated it, cracked my collarbone, cracked my arm, and I didn't think anything of it. And so when I went back in May for the pre-induction physical, I failed. I got a 1Y deferment, and I was really upset. I really wanted to go to Vietnam and fly helicopters. And now I thank my lucky stars for that football injury, because it very well may have saved my life. So if by this time, okay, I wasn't going to go in the military, I wasn't going to go to Vietnam, so what am I going to do? And I decided to go to college. So I went to a community college of Allegheny County, South Campus, in Allegheny County, West Mifflin, Pennsylvania. Part of my old high school was part of the classes, and in McKeesport there was a building they bought and renovated. So I was going to college, where I pretty much went to high school and where I grew up. So I needed to pay for that some way, and this is where the steel mills come in. The first steel mill I worked at was called Levinson Steel, and it was in Homewood, Pennsylvania. And they were making 105 millimeter shells for Vietnam. So I worked there and made, for me, a lot of money, and I was able to go back to school. I worked there one summer, I think. So I eventually started going away to school to West Virginia University, where I graduated. And I was there for a couple semesters, and I came home, and I got home late at night. My dad was in bed. Got up the next morning, my dad came down, and I said, "Hey, Dad," and he's Mike, how you doing? He was, glad to see me, and he's getting ready to go to work, and as he went out the door, he turned and said, "If you want to stay here the rest of the summer, I advise you to get a haircut and shave. If you don't, you're not going to sleep here tonight." So with all my youthful vigor and my, I was a young man now, and I said, "Yes, sir." So I went to McKeesport. I took the 56C bus, Port Authority Transit bus, and it went all the way from my house down into McKeesport. The employment office is national too, and I filled out the application. And I have to say, at this time, I had pretty long hair and a big bushy beard. So I filled out the application, and I turned it in to the guy, and I was on my way out the door, and I thought, wait a second, I don't know if I signed and dated that. So I went back and I said, "Sir, could I see my application? I didn't sign it or date it." And he said, "Sure." And he reaches over into the garbage can and pulls it out. And I said, "Why did you throw that away?" And he said, "We don't hire your kind here." And I said, what do you mean, my kind? He said, this long hair and this beard and this hippie stuff. And I said, sir, could you hold this application for about an hour? Would you mind? And he goes, I don't know. I said, please, just hold it for an hour and I'll be back. So I went to the barber shop and I got my hair cut real short. I got shaved and got all cleaned up. And I walked back into the employment office and the guy looked at me and I said, sir, I'm back. And he said, what? And I said, I'm the guy that asked you to hold my application. And he said, come on back in here. And so I went back and he offered me a job on the spot. And they were such big production that day. It was about 10:30 in the morning. And he asked me when I could start. And I said, anytime. And he said, could you be here at 3? So I got my job in National Tube. These were the kind of jobs that you could raise a family on and buy a house. I never made that kind of money in my life. So my introduction to National Tube, of course, was a safety lecture. And they gave us all this equipment to wear, hard hats and goggles and ear protection and steel-toed boots with metatarsal protectors on it. And they would show us these safety films. And there was always a guy they would call in that would hold up his hand and his ring finger was gone. And either he caught it on something or was heating something and burned his finger off. So that really got our attention. So I started my job at National Tube, and National Tube was magnificent. It stretched 2 or 3 miles along the Monongahela River. And right below where the Youghiogheny entered the Monongahela in McKeesport, there was a hot mill and a cold mill. I worked in the hot mill where they made pipe. And these pipe were 48 inches in diameter and 40 feet long. When I walked in the mill, it was like, it was magical. I was stunned, the size of everything. The roofs were like 50 feet in the air. There were catwalks everywhere, machines moving around, giant presses, giant beveling machines, pipes moving through this like conveyor belt. And the scale of it was so intense. I was just stunned. It was like being in a cavern, but it was an industrial cavern. And it was loud. There was so much noise that you ended up living in a world of silence because you had your earplugs on and it was like white noise in the background. You couldn't hear anything. So you didn't really speak a lot to people. You had to get right up beside them, and so there was a lot of hand signals given and things like that. So I was actually overcome when I went in to see that steel mill. This was American industry. This was the backbone of the United States. And I started hearing echoes of Joe Majorak and John Henry. And men migrated from all over the country and all over the world to work at these steel mills. It was an opportunity. And now I was a part of that. And I was really proud. Like I said, there must have been 3,000 to 4,000 men working there. And there was 3 shifts, 7 to 3, 3 to 11, and 11 to 7. And then there was a swing shift. You did those shifts for 2 weeks. And that swing shift was tough because you worked a couple of days daylight, and then afternoon, then night to cover all the other ones. So that was a little bit hard. But like I said, the steel came from the river, either from Duquesne or Clairton, either up the river or down the river. And these giant plates came in. And they were loaded on this machine, and the edges had to be beveled so they could be welded together when they were bent. But the steel was so big that there was a carriage that the bevelers moved on this carriage up and down, and the plate of steel stayed still. And from there it went down the line. And I worked in all the positions down the line as it was needed. The first place after it came out of being beveled, it went to the U press. And it was a press that bent the steel into a big U shape. And one shift, the press was sticking for some reason. So my foreman came up to him and he says, Mike, he says, I want you to work beside the U press there. The pipe isn't dropping off when it comes up. And he gave me a 12-pound sledge. And he says, every time that pipe comes on, tap it on one end, and that vibration will loosen it and it'll fall down. So that's what I did for a couple of days. I walked around with that 12-pound sledge on my shoulder and hit that steel and make it ring, and it would drop down. So I went to lunch one day when I was doing that, and it's in the lunchroom, and I came and put my hard hat back on, and somebody with chalk wrote at the top of my hard hat, Thor. And so that became my name, and I loved it, Thor, the god of thunder. So that stuck with me all through my mill life. And from the U press, it would go to the O press, and then it would go through the welding machines, and they would weld this 40-foot piece of pipe, and there were inspections all the way along the way. And once the pipe was welded, it went up to another station, and they had to chip off like 8 inches on either end, inside and outside, so when they put the pipes together, they could put a weld, a bead there, and it would match. So working up there was terrible, because you actually had to, you're like da, 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 and echoing off this pipe, and then you had to roll inside and do it over your head, bum, 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 and there's a guy down at the other end doing the same thing. So these echoes were everywhere. And after about 2 weeks, I got such a severe headache, I went to my foreman and said, I don't know what to do. And he goes, Pratt, he said, 2 weeks, that's about average. Okay, we're gonna move you somewhere else. And all those old guys that worked there, they were stone deaf, and they were lip readers. And they had lived with that noise all those years. So I moved down at some of the machines that pressurized them and checked the x-rays to check the welds. And I finally got down to the final inspection station where they matched the serial numbers with the plate steel and the pipe to know that everybody had gone through and everything was fine. So this is where I met a man that lives in my memory today, and it was one of the most remarkable things, and I nicknamed him Kolbasi Joe. And he was a little Polish guy, and he was the final guy in the line, and he said these pipes were fine, and he would direct them to be moved on one side of the mill to be loaded and taken out. I never spoke to him. It was so loud you couldn't speak to anybody. And one of my jobs was, after these pipes were finished, I had to roll them down into position so they could be loaded. And you had a long pipe, and it was bent like a U at the bottom, and you could just maneuver that pipe by sticking it in there. So I'm rolling this pipe around, and one day, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the mill door is open, and it's snowing like crazy, and I'm looking out on the Monongahela River, and chunks of ice are floating down the river. And I was freezing. I had a little kerosene heater that would roast one side, you can turn around, it would roast the other side. So I'm rolling this steel, feeling so alone, I'm asking myself, what the hell am I doing here? My gosh, And so I did this, and all of a sudden I caught a whiff of something, and there was this aroma wafting through the air in the steel mill, this fantastic aroma, and I didn't know what it was, but it was something cooking. And so on my break, I went to find out what it was, and several other guys were on their way there too, and we were like zombies, marching toward this smell and following it. And here, up on his platform, stood Kolbasi Joe. Always wore these plaid shirts, buttoned down to the chest, no hair on his chest, just big, broad guy. And he had formed a screen below the heating element on the platform. And he cut up tiny pieces of Kolbasi, put toothpicks in them, and roasted them. And he had formed a drip tray, so when the grease fell off, it would go into this tray. Well, if you've never eaten Kolbasi, you have a treat coming. It's a Polish sausage, and the way it's seasoned makes it great. And so at 2 o'clock in the morning in a snowstorm, when you're working at United States Steel, Kolbasi Joe would hand you these pieces of Kolbasi. And we were like going to church and taking the sacrament. There would be 4 or 5 people lined up. He did this every night. And it was just fantastic. And then he branched out and started cutting up little potatoes, and he'd do that too. So I eat kielbasa now, and when I do, I think of Kielbasa Joe and his setup he had there. And that was the most wonderful feeling, to know that you could follow that smell and get a nice roasted piece of kielbasa. And I'll never forget that. And another incident in that section where I was rolling these pipe had to do with the mill cats. And some of these cats were giant. And we all thought that they were deaf because they lived in this crescendo of noise all the time. And they were pretty skittish. So one time I'm rolling these pipes slowly, and they were raised a little bit off the floor on rails. And they were moving real slow and just come down. And I looked up, and here came this giant mill cat. And the cat stopped at the end of the pipe as it was slowly rolling by. And another one came. So 3 little kittens came out behind her. And I looked and I thought, oh my God, they're gonna get smashed. I can't believe this. So the mother cat jumped in this 40-foot long pipe that was 48 inches diameter. She jumped in, and the 3 little kittens followed her. I couldn't believe it. And the pipe rolled past me, and I squatted down, and I saw 3 little cattails, bouncing, going down that. And the mother went out, and the 3 kittens, and I saw them on the other side. And I thought, these cats are like acrobats. They've learned this from the day they were born, and they survived in that giant mill with all that noise and all that equipment, that dangerous area with all those pipes rolling by, and they had learned how to survive. That's pretty much the end of this episode. And what I want to do is I want to thank United States Steel for putting me through college. They gave me a full scholarship. The only thing is I had to work for them to get it. But it was a great experience, a great time, and I was lucky to be able to do that when I did. Thank you.
Right.